Alarmo was the product of 10 years of work by Nintendo in the field of quality of life research, but I think it would be foolish to imagine that this is the end of Nintendo's development journey rather than just a brief pit stop. Just as the health-focused innovations they developed for the Wii found new life on games like Ring Fit Adventure for the Switch, it strikes me that Alarmo is a bold step towards what could be their most transformative new technology yet. Specifically, how is it that the creators of a product line called Game & Watch have yet to truly enter the smartwatch space? Well, if we break down their history, it has to be said they are already well on the way. Settle in as we explore the likelihoods and methods that Nintendo might return to making watches in a big way. Let's start by rewinding a bit. In fact, let's rewind right back to the 1980s when legendary assembly line engineer turned inventing genius Gunpei Yokoi came up with the idea for the Game & Watch when he saw someone on the Shinkansen playing with a calculator and, following his principle of taking seasoned technology and repurposing it for innovative use, he soon conceived a way to repurpose calculator displays to something much more. In this case, the watch element was really a bit of an extra. At the time, digital watches were expensive, so making a child's toy that also had this extra benefit of allowing you to tell the time was a bonus. Nintendo took a similar approach decades later when creating Brain Age. As the director of the game explained to Satoru Iwata, a more subtle detail is that it always displays the current time. The Nintendo DS series has an internal clock, so he simply decided to display that. And of course, time-bound gaming had given shape to Animal Crossing in particular. Meanwhile, other departments in Nintendo had other areas of interest. A team called Nintendo NSD, or Network Service Department, a group which has now been folded into one of Nintendo's technology departments, was behind the development of the Nintendo DS Japan and Europe exclusive Walk With Me, also called Personal Trainer Walking, a game packaged with not one, but two pedometers. Now, to be fair, this was not an initiative from the Nintendo team in Japan itself, and as the developers tell it, there was a request from Europe for us to make something fun for the DS using a pedometer. And at about the same time, we received a proposal from Creatures saying that they wanted to make a health tool for the DS using a pedometer. So with that, we made a start on the development of the activity meter. Still, when they found that 4.2 million pedometers were sold in Japan every year, they soon got interested, and although it was delayed by Iwata-san himself due to compatibility issues with the early hardware, it was finally released. While this was a fairly standard pedometer concept, it still had a bit of Nintendo magic, comparing your activity patterns to varieties of animals, so instead of being told you walked 8,000 steps in a day, you would be told that you were a night bat. They even made pedometers which could be attached to pet dogs. And of course, over this time period, physical activity and play became a major plank of Nintendo's sales strategy, with Wii Fit and Wii Sports gracing playrooms to nursing homes across the world. In 2013, Nintendo roared back into the pedometer-type business with the Fit Meter, which could be attached to a waistband to detect how many calories you had burned in a day. This required a team-up with tech giant Panasonic, although since it ultimately launched on the Wii U, the sales were not impressive, and when fitness games re-emerged in Nintendo's lineup, it was with Ring Fit Adventure, utilising the Nintendo Switch sensors to track pulse rate. Plus, the same ambulatory-focused ideas kept being utilised by Nintendo from 3DS Street Pass to the explicitly walking-friendly focus of smartphone apps like Pokemon Go and Pikmin Bloom. Back to the field of watches though, many children's watches have been given Nintendo characters, but in 2021, Nintendo teamed up with Swiss watch manufacturer Tag Heuer to create a limited edition Super Mario watch. As Nintendo said on their website, in this collaboration, the Tag Heuer Connected is offering wearers a fun new way to get more active, feeling the thrill of achieving goals throughout the day. The Tag Heuer Connected x Super Mario Limited Edition is presented in a packaging designed exclusively for this collaboration. It also comes with a travel case in Super Mario Red. This edition is limited to 2,000 watches and will be available only in selected Tag Heuer boutiques and at www.tagheuer.com in some regions starting July 15, 2021. So this was very clearly a niche product. But not to be deterred, the company then followed up with a Mario Kart watch design the following year. Then, while not a watch, Nintendo developed for Super Nintendo World the Power Up Band, which uses NFC to link to Amiibo, as well as all sorts of different activities within their theme park attractions. And now, of course, we have Alarmo, which is a literal alarm clock with an interface modelled on everybody's favourite characters. All of which to say, Nintendo is very, very far down the road towards the creation of their own kind of smartwatch. What is stopping them, in fact? Well, there are a few things. Firstly, the technology has been costly until this point, and they tend to want to utilise technology that is low priced enough that they can maintain decent margins. Secondly, and quite pragmatically, the company hasn't really been in a position to push innovative new concepts for quite a while due to the poor performance of the Wii U. It's only since they've been able to bootstrap their research departments back up again in the wake of the Switch's success that it's possible to consider even more ambitious projects such as this. Thirdly, smartwatches have in recent times been very much for high-end consumers. It's conceivable that people might want to advertise their Nintendo fan status some of the time and even to have Nintendo tech by their bedside, but most people don't routinely use multiple watches, and it's difficult to imagine the austere atmosphere of traditionalist Japanese companies being enormously welcoming of a Mario watch. Besides, the pool of people who are open to using smartwatches is still relatively small, and those people are more likely to want functionality from their watch of the sort provided by Apple or one of their competitors. What Nintendo needs to create, therefore, is not a true smartwatch, but a toy that uses the same principles of the smartwatch. In other words, like with Game & Watch, telling the time could only really be a secondary capability, and that, again, pushes down the cost window they're operating in. It should be stated that when Satoru Iwata was alive, he explained his strategy for the quality of life part of their business as focusing on non-wearable technology, although of course the Power Band and the Ring Fit and Switch Sports leg straps show a movement towards wearability in recent years. And now we know that Nintendo have not one but two, and possibly more, technology departments, and while clearly a lot of focus will be going towards their mainline console business, it strikes me as perfectly reasonable to think that Alarmo is just the first in a growing drumbeat of hardware devices developed by Nintendo in parallel to their regular gaming business. It's also possible that a watch could have many other benefits. Nintendo's Paris-based technological research team NERD explained that they contributed a lot to the development of Switch Sports. They said one challenge was to make sure that the player's movements are accurately aligned with the avatar's on-screen forward-facing position without having to rely on any kind of additional tracking system. Working in close collaboration with the system software and game development team in Japan, NERD developed a custom sensor fusion algorithm uniquely tailored to the game, allowing players to swing their sword or racket with a higher sense of immersion in sports like Chambara or badminton. Of course, while this was useful to maximize the capabilities of the Nintendo Switch Joy-Con, the thought must have occurred to them, what if they did have an additional tracking system? Ring Fit and Switch Sports already use leg straps which are made by simply shoving a Joy-Con into a piece of elastic, but what if Nintendo had, say, a Power Band that could be a little more flexible in its use? Essentially, they need a clear blue ocean strategy in the smartwatch space. Shigeru Miyamoto recently, when discussing the Nintendo Museum, mused about the philosophy of Nintendo's leader for over 50 years, Hiroshi Yamauchi. He shared that Yamauchi used to say that a lot of companies put a lot of effort and resources into sales to make sure that the product is advertised well so that it reaches greater sales. However, Yamauchi's own philosophy was the opposite. He believed that if you need to over-advertise something to sell, not selling it at all is better. So, what is a smartwatch option that is going to have broad appeal to the point where it doesn't even need to be sold? Let's look at the other tech on the market. We already have watches with cameras, with interfaces, which can play games, which have NFC capacities, which have IR sensors, obviously incorporating the kind of heartbeat tracking, pedometer and movement tracking tech that Nintendo have worked with for so long would be simplicity itself for such designing geniuses as Nintendo, but it won't help them in the marketplace if that's all the technology does. Okay, I've talked around it a lot, but what exactly am I getting at, as a potential product. And of course, Nintendo are one of the least predictable companies in the world, so this isn't a crystal ball, but let's try and sketch out something tangible they could actually put out. Firstly, price. Alarmo has sold out quite quickly, but Nintendo produces often in quite low quantities, so that's no surprise. Still, it shows $100 or regional equivalents is a price people will pay for something with ultimately quite limited functionality. I think it's reasonable therefore to imagine that a video game device with a much broader scope than a simple alarm clock could go for $150 or perhaps $200. I don't think they would include cameras, but IR sensors, pedometers and a small touchscreen would be a must. It would need to also incorporate functions such as perhaps an Alarmo app. Presumably the gyrometer could detect when you're upright, and include both Pikmin Bloom and Pikmin Go style games. It is, let's face it, only a matter of time before Pokemon Go comes to smartwatches, and since both Pikmin Bloom and Pokemon Go are developed by Niantic, once they implement the technology for one, the other will surely follow. And by the way, I don't know they'll necessarily even call it a watch. A power band makes much more sense, but even the band thing I would query. After all, a watch suggests that it's restricted to the wrist, but wouldn't it make more sense to have a small device, a kind of digital pebble, although probably large enough to avoid being a choking hazard, which can be attached to a variety of elastic bands of different sizes to be worn variously on the wrist, leg, around the neck, or clipped to the belt. Nintendo is all about sweating their assets, and having a device like this now opens up a whole sea of possibilities. But remember that Nintendo has a hunger to create games that cast aside traditional controllers. 1-2-Switch might not be the most beloved game in the Switch's ecosystem, but it was designed as a way to play games where people had to face each other. Yoshiaki Koizumi encouraged new entrants to the company to think of wider ways to play than just video games. If Splatoon was influenced by paintball, and Alarmo's development was influenced by games such as Japanese versions of Red Light Green Light, what other real-world games could they incorporate using a watch? The kinds of games that have captured the imagination of children for centuries. Capture the Flag, Tags, Cops and Robbers, Grandmother's Footsteps, Battleships. The sheer number of potential physical real-world games is huge, and it only takes some innovative Nintendo magic to take on the concept and give it that unique Nintendo twist. Imagine a game where you first walk the outer boundary so the game knows the play area, or potentially the player area is set on a parental control app, but then you are free to move within the space. Perhaps a tag-like game, perhaps something else. What if you had to set the pebble on the floor and approach it as quietly as you can so as not to wake Bowser? What if it can be fitted into a spyglass so you can look through it and see a world invisible in the real world but visible through the spyglass, allowing you to play Luigi's Balloon Hunt? Or heck, what if Nintendo make their own take on Fortnite and you have to explore your home territory, except with only the Pebble eyeglass to clue you up as to where your rivals are? What if there's a mode like Luigi's Balloon Hunt, but in the real world, with people leaving balloons on their phone or on their versions of the smartwatch in hidden places that are visible only through the Pebble screen? Of course, most of these games sound quite gimmicky in nature, but the fact is that there's no reason why, if the device penetrates the market, and particularly if it connects to other devices such as phones or the mainline consoles, it couldn't reach out and branch into something much deeper. Think about Animal Crossing. What if you could carry your village around on your wrist, sending messages and receiving gifts in real time at all times? So look, I'm not saying that all these ideas would necessarily work, but I do think there is huge scope for a Nintendo-developed tiny gameplay device that would have multiple functionalities, mopping up all the technology they've been playing with all these years. Whether we see this kind of thing explored more in smaller single-function devices such as Alarmo or the pedometer, or whether these are add-on features to games such as the Wii Fit board, or whether they go full tilt and create a completely different kind of gameplay console, I think there is a strong chance we will see something in this realm from Nintendo in the future. As ever with forecasting unpredictable Nintendo ideas, it's difficult to come up with a formulation of words that even captures such an open field of possibilities. So let's try this. I think there is a 30% chance that by the end of 2027, we will have another non-console device besides Alarmo, which will have its own operating system. Whether or not that's a smartwatch or not, we will of course have to wait and see. Let me know what you think. Do check out the Patreon below, and I will see you next time for another Nintendo Forecast.